Sometimes trying to run a large format view camera in the field while trying to film yourself, it just becomes a lot to juggle. And as it turns out, the first subject to today's video, I totally forgot to film any B-roll at all of the scene I was even photographing. Please don't go away. Here's a pretty river.
I've been exploring along this creek, kind of walking through the trees along the water. This is actually the same creek that I shot that photo of the natural bridge on. It's just way further down into the valley before it dumps out into the lake. I'm starting to get a few clouds in the sky, and the haze is kind of building in again, so the light's been kind of changing up and down. But once in a while I get this like nice glow up in the foreground where it just kind of lights up the water and whatever's in it. And I found myself a composition where I've got two rocks that are in the middle of the creek with all the water rushing past it. And I thought it framed up really nicely, so I just went ahead and isolated the entire frame with my 300mm lens, just focusing on nothing but those rocks, just filled the whole frame up. I focused for the leading corner of the rock that's closest to me, to the camera, and then just kind of relied on depth of field to hopefully get the rest of the rock front to back sharp. I don't really care about the water because, of course, the water's moving and it's going to be blurry no matter what. And with my shutter speeds, none of it's going to be sharp. So I'm just worried about the rocks. I didn't really have to use any front tilt or any movements on this one. My camera's kind of at an angle already, but all my movements are zeroed out. I did have to use a monorail extension with the 300mm. That's kind of a given, because the single rail piece isn't quite long enough to even focus to infinity on this lens. So no bellows extension this time because my bellows are right at 300mm, so I didn't have to add anything for that. That's the focal length of the lens. Yeah, and that's about all there is to it. So I exposed one sheet of Provia 100 on this one. And then I was a little worried about the dynamic range where the highlights went, so I went ahead and exposed a sheet of Ektar as well. The Provia shot, I went 3 seconds at f/45. And the Ektar shot, I gave it a little bit longer since there's a little more latitude with that film, and I went for 4 seconds because some of my shadows were pushing a little bit far into the blacks. So I was a little worried about that with the Provia shot. So I got a safety shot that's on Ektar with an extra second of exposure on it. So hopefully one of those will be okay. I did have a goof up when I was exposing that Ektar sheet. So my stopwatch accidentally hit the start button twice, which stops timing. So I had to try to count in my head. Since I wasn't real confident in my exposure time on that one, I did expose a second sheet of Ektar that was timed correctly at 4 seconds with the stopwatch. So technically it was one Provia shot, 2 Ektar sheets. But I kind of got a feeling I underexposed the first Ektar shot. Guess we'll find out. Yeah, there's one more composition I want to try to line up here. Just probably about 20 feet down from where I am right now. It's a wider shot of this whole creek as it's coming down, and there's a bend further down. Not real sure on the composition yet. I guess we'll see how it frames up with the camera, because I don't know if it's a very strong composition, but it is a beautiful scene. We'll see if it translates well on the ground glass.
Gotta say I was pretty impressed by the color and the composition of this one. I was really happy with it. One thing is this gray section of this rock is really, really bright. There is detail here. There's a really bright spot here in the rapids, which I'll probably end up burning down a little bit. It is white. It's supposed to be white, but there is a little bit of texture and detail in here. It's kind of hard to see, but same with this. I mean, there is something to recover here. It's just, and it was supposed to be bright. It's a bright piece of rock. However, it's a little distracting. So some work to do on that. As far as the color negative shots go, probably have even more detail here, of course. So here's both of those shots. It does go pretty dark over here, but I'm okay with that. You know, you make your creative decisions in the field while you're calculating your exposure. And, you know, I don't want the whole thing to be middle gray. You know, I want some shadows and I want some highlights in here so that you have contrast. And while I was metering, I wanted this to remain dark because I knew this was going to go bright. And I think the slide film kind of showcases that pretty well. I really like the greens reflecting in the water from all the trees around it and stuff like that. It's just that, there's some distractions here with all the really super bright spots since your eye kind of naturally goes to the bright areas. So I just need to tame this down a little bit. Sharpness and detail is absolutely fantastic in here. I was so stoked with this. It's just a joy to look at. Compositionally, I really like the contrast between the jagged texture of the rock and the smooth water. I think it's really cool. And then the color is just beautiful. Kind of funny that you hike all the way into these gorgeous mountain views with all these great vistas and stuff like that. And my favorite exposure so far, I think, is just two rocks in the middle of a river. Is what it is, I guess.
This one I'm not so sure about. It's a really beautiful scene. It's just, a beautiful scene doesn't necessarily make a great photograph, that kind of thing, It's just a river shot looking upstream. It's just the composition, I think, that I'm a little iffy on. But I think it's strong enough that I went ahead and shot some, exposed some film on it. So there's this massive boulder that's on the left-hand side of the frame that I'm using to kind of anchor that side of the composition. And then the water just kind of flows out towards the right corner. So I'm shooting with my Nikon 90mm, f4.5. And I used some rear tilt on this one to try to get the foreground to kind of dominate the composition a little bit. Because I really want that water, well, what I'm hoping is that the water rushing towards the bottom of the frame makes for interesting foreground. That's what I'm banking on anyway. We'll see if that actually is the case. Background's got plenty of interest in it too. There's a rock wall with some nice trees and stuff in the background. It's a really pretty scene. It's just, I actually put priority on focusing for the background on this one because the foreground's all moving water and it's going to be blurry anyway. And there are some, there are some grasses and some rocks in the foreground that I wanted sharp too, but the depth of field with the wide angle lens, it's not a problem. There's actually some really pretty wildflowers off the side on the right side of the composition too. I wanted to make sure I get those in there because they're really pretty. I put the circular polarizer on this one again because, again, it's broad daylight and I got a lot of harsh reflections coming out the water. So the circular polarizer just helps kind of cut right through those so I can see the darker water underneath. So I added 1 1/3 stop for that. So all said and done, I put my exposure time at 1 second, f32 and 1/3. Adding the extra 1/3 aperture so I can maintain my 1 second shutter speed without having to do an awkward shutter speed. So I went with one sheet of Provia 100 on this, and then I took a safety shot on Ektar 100 because I am just a little bit worried again about the dynamic range. So I put a safety shot on color negative, which has a little more latitude. But otherwise, it's been beautiful working out here, just kind of taking my time. I've got 2 compositions out of the same area. Hopefully they turn out. But now I think it's time to pack up and probably start heading back. It's about a 3-mile hike to get back to my truck.
Well, that shot is obviously overexposed. And looking down here in the detail, it's completely ruined. This is gone. It's completely clipped data. So this exposure is no good. Otherwise, if not for the exposure, it would have been fine. Focus is great. There's lots of detail all the way through, all the way from the foreground, all the way through these little flowers, and then up into the background. The focus is great. It's just that I completely missed exposure on this one. Fortunately, I did shoot a color negative. So this one's better because of the latitude of the film. It looks like it held detail up here much better. So I do have a shot that I can work with here. Compositionally, it's just a shot looking upriver, you know. It's not even the best light. But it was a beautiful scene. I don't know if it completely translates here in this image. Of course, I'll have to scan this in and work on it some more and see how I feel about it. And maybe I'll feel a little better about it as time passes. And, you know, sometimes as photographs age, you tend to like them a little bit better. I don't know if this will be one of them, but I don't know. Once again, let me know your thoughts down in the comments.
So I think I'm gonna call the video right here. I just want to say thanks for watching. And if you enjoyed this video, it super helped me out if you give me a thumbs up. I'd really appreciate that. And maybe while you're down there, consider hitting the subscribe button. And if you want to be notified when I release new videos, make sure you hit the bell icon. And with that, just want to say thanks again, and I'll catch you in the next one.